Do you want a way to track your menstrual cycle that will lead to you feeling more comfortable and confident in your body? Well, if you watch until the end of this video, you will understand how your menstrual cycle impacts your mood changes, energy changes, libido, metabolism, and so much more. If you haven't subscribed yet, do so now by clicking that red subscribe button below, but also click the bell to be notified every time I post a new video on menstrual cycle health and fitness. I went from totally hormonally confused about my menstrual cycle, not understanding where I was in my cycle, being surprised by my PMS, even though it happened every single time, right? And I actually, more personally, had an unintended pregnancy because I didn't know how to track my cycle. But now I live in a body that I feel confident in. I know where I am in my cycle, and it guides my decision-making process on a day-to-day basis. And the same exact thing is possible for you too. So let's dive in. So here's the nitty-gritty. Our body gives us cues as to where we're at in our cycle throughout the month. Every day we get bodily cues. So some cyclical review for people who are not as familiar with the cycle. So most of us bleed every 28-ish days, and that varies for most people. And our cycle is broken down into 4 phases. You have your bleed phase, your follicular phase, your ovulatory phase, and your luteal phase. So here's an outline of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about mood and energy, we're going to talk about libido and fertility, and we're going to talk about metabolism changes as well. This wheel on the right here describes our cycle. So our cycle always starts with the bleed phase. This is the first part of our cycle, and it lasts about 3 to 7 days for most people. Then we move on to the follicular phase. This is about 4 to 7 days for most people. The ovulatory phase right here is about 4 to 6 days, and the luteal phase is 11 to 14 days. And we'll be going into all the changes that you experience phase by phase, starting with the bleed phase. The next thing that I want you to notice is these yin phases. So these are the phases to be receptive, the luteal and bleed phase. And the follicular and ovulatory phase are more yang phases. They're more outward phases of our cycle. So if you were to take that circle and spread it out on a piece of paper and then mark the hormonal changes, this is what it would look like. The hormones that we're going to be focusing on right now is just estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. And then temperature is this red line. So let's go through that right now. This is estrogen, this purple line, and you can see it spikes right here, about in the middle. It spikes right before ovulation in your ovulatory phase. Same thing with this green line right here. The green line is testosterone. It also spikes then. And you also see this blue line, progesterone, which gradually raises here. That happens after these 2 peaks of testosterone and estrogen, and then you'll see this red line right here. The red line is your temperature. So all of these things are changing throughout your cycle. And if you've ever heard anybody say, or maybe you've said it yourself, that you're so hormonal, well, yeah, you are, because this is where at any one time when you're watching this video, you are at any of these 1 places, and it could shift at any moment. So yes, we are hormonal. That is our nature. Now I'm going to take you phase by phase through the cycle so you can understand your cyclical changes, what it means, and how to plan for success. Starting with the first phase, the bleed phase. Like I said, this phase is 3 to 7 days. And some of the bleed phase markers that you can look at, one of the best ones is your blood color. Your menstrual cycle and your bleed itself is insight to your overall health. So this is what the different blood colors mean. If your blood color is a little bit more pink, that means you have lower estrogen. And it's safe for you to consume soy. People with high estrogen, not so much, but people with low estrogen, we want you to have a little bit more estrogen, and soy is an estrogenic food that you can eat. If your blood color is orange or a little bit gray, you definitely need to consult a doctor. There could be a possible infection or a pH balance. If your bleed is purple, if your blood rather is purple, you want to support your liver with nettle and dandelion and really encourage toxin elimination, which is just pooping. You just gotta poop. And this, as you already saw, means high estrogen. So purple blood, higher estrogen. If your blood is cherry in color, that indicates a good healthy flow. Cherry from start to finish, that is what we want. And if your blood color, this happened to me and I'll share about this, if your blood color is a little bit more of this rusty red color, then that indicates low progesterone. And so consuming foods with zinc, B vitamins, and vitamin C, and balancing your blood sugar and stress levels are the best way to start addressing progesterone. I did it, it worked for me. This is also a phase where your hormones are the lowest. So you remember seeing on this chart right here, boom. You see any hormones? You see any purple lines? Any green lines here? No, our hormones are the lowest during this phase, which means our energy levels are also going to be the lowest. So this is not a time where we do outward activities and have a lot of things planned. This is really the time to go inward because our hormones aren't supporting a day-to-day life that is very outward. Remember the yin and the yang. So in my personal experience, in my own bleed phase, what I've worked through with myself is low progesterone. So my blood color used to be that rusty color and I used to spot a lot. And that's not really the case because I've supported progesterone. And I'll talk about how I have been doing that in a next video because that is literally a whole length video. And then we have the follicular phase. So the follicular phase starts the day you stop bleeding. When you stop bleeding, you're in the follicular phase. It lasts about 4 to 7 days. And you can see right here, these are two hormones that are important, estrogen and testosterone. And when estrogen and testosterone are rising, that's when you're in the follicular phase. So imagine a little box right here. This is the follicular phase, and this is when these two very important, very fun hormones are rising for us. So this correlates with a rise in energy. And you can also be more positive as well. You finally have some hormones back. And so you're gonna feel a rise in energy, a rise in positivity, a rise in focus as well. In the follicular phase, that's when I get my best work done. Because I'm actually in my follicular phase right now, hey. I feel like the veil has been lifted in the follicular phase because our energy levels are rising, our testosterone and estrogen is rising, and it's like we're just being carried through to this wonderful place called ovulation. Before I continue, I'm curious what your favorite self-care strategies are. Go ahead, comment below and let me know because self-care is such a huge part of our menstrual cycle. The ovulatory phase. This is the pinnacle of our fertility, and this phase lasts 3 to 6 days. And on the right, you'll see a little cervical fluid chart that I made. And this really just is meant to illustrate the phases of fertility and how your cervical fluid changes. This is real body knowledge that you can use. So if your cervical fluid is dry, clumpy, and white, that tells you that you're in the beginning stages of fertility. So you can get pregnant around that time. Some of you might want to get pregnant, some of you might not want to get pregnant. Regardless, this is a great real body clue that you can use for you to tell where you're at in your cycle. If your cervical fluid is sticky and opaque, this indicates that you're at the early stages of fertility and you're about the most fertile you'll ever be. And if it is clear and stretchy, that means you are highly fertile. The reason why it becomes stretchy, it's really amazing, is that the stretchy fluid actually helps transport sperm. So if you're trying to get pregnant, that stretchy fluid is really what you're looking for. So we've talked about cervical fluid changes. Now let's talk about the rise in energy too. Remember, testosterone and estrogen are peaking out at this phase. And sometimes, this used to be me in the past, sometimes people tell me that they feel a little manic in the ovulatory phase. That is because that rise in energy. And again, it's a real body cue to tell you where you're at in your cycle. Another thing that's very handy is your body temperature. So your body temp rises after ovulation. It goes from around 97 to 97.7. And then it will hover there until you start to bleed as well. So that rise in temperature tells you that you've ovulated and that you're no longer fertile until your next follicular ovulatory phase. So it's a great clue if you're looking for some birth control strategies. My experience in the ovulatory phase is I always get a little manic and irritable. The ovulatory phase isn't a typical, like, I feel like a goddess, I feel my best, because that's not necessarily true for me. I usually feel like I have just a little bit too much energy. Go ahead and comment below if you do too. But anyway, in the ovulatory phase, I have noticed that when I have too much energy or when I feel like I'm headed towards that place, always eating cooling foods and balancing my blood sugar has actually been one of the most greatest techniques for helping me feel a little bit more calm and settled in my body in my ovulatory phase. Now we come to the luteal phase. The proverbial wind down is what I like to call it. It lasts anywhere from 11 to 14 days, and it begins after the egg begins to die. So that's the day your basal body temperature rises. And a little note, if you are somebody who is taking your basal body temperature, you want to make sure that you do it in the morning before you've gotten up, before you do literally anything. It needs to be your basal or baseline body temperature. So keep your thermometer right by your bedside. Maybe have a sticky note. Maybe your alarm clock goes off and reminds you. I don't know. If you're doing this, you'll figure it out. Something to know about this phase is that your progesterone rises, and we've all experienced this, but what does this mean? Progesterone actually has a subduing effect on the brain. So this is why our energy wanes, because our brain is a little subdued and we don't have as much physical energy or physical strength during this time. And it's a hard time to focus as well because progesterone is subduing. So creative projects or tasks that have a deadline aren't great in our luteal phase. And I recognize a lot of people that have a cycle do have to deal with deadlines and do have to deal with that type of stuff. And the more we can plan around our cycle and know from the real body cues, the more we can plan for success in our own life. And the last thing I'll say here is that our metabolism actually increases in our luteal phase as well. So in this phase, we actually burn more calories. So this is why you want to eat everything in this phase. Again, a great real body cue to tell you where you are in your cycle. And now my experience with my luteal phase, I love my luteal phase. Like I said, progesterone has a nice subduing effect on the brain. After the mania of ovulation, I can finally relax. So my first couple days of the luteal phase are incredibly relaxing. I'm not extremely talkative. I'm not online so much. I'm just chilling by myself in the garden or with my homies. But what I've worked through and what I continue to work through is my mood changes. And my boyfriend can attest to that, let me tell you. But he can also attest to the fact that I've actually gotten so much more balanced just by understanding these changes and applying what I know to my life. And like I said, now that you have the knowledge, you can do the exact same thing. So you can understand all of this, but if you don't put your insight into action, you're never gonna go anywhere. If you are somebody who thrives with accountability, with motivation, with a strategy, go ahead and book a free call with me. The link to do that is in the description below. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to be notified every time I post a new video on menstrual cycle health and fitness. I'll see you next time.